How do you investigate a robbery when no one can even determine when it actually happened? This question haunted the investigators from the very moment they were called in, but they quickly found themselves trapped in a labyrinth of uncertainty. The crime was unlike any they had encountered before, defying every conventional method of detection and analysis. There was no shattered glass, no forced entry, no hurried footsteps captured by security cameras. In fact, there wasn't even a clear crime scene, only a sprawling network of seemingly legitimate transactions, impeccable paperwork, and a trail that led nowhere. It was as if the theft had been swallowed whole by the very system meant to protect against it. The connection to the Yakuza added a sinister layer to the mystery. Known for their ruthlessness and intricate criminal enterprises, the Yakuza were no strangers to elaborate schemes. But even seasoned detectives were unprepared for the subtlety of this operation. At first glance, everything appeared routine. Businesses involved showed no signs of distress. Financial records balanced perfectly, and every individual link to the case carried an identity as solid as any official document could provide. No glaring red flags, no suspicious behavior. Just a seamless flow of legitimate activity that masked a profound violation. It took weeks before anyone realized that something valuable was missing. The absence was not immediately obvious because the theft was not about stealing physical goods or cash from a vault. Instead, it was a disappearance crafted to avoid detection, a robbery without a timestamp or a pinpointed location. This delayed discovery only deepened the investigators' frustration. How do you chase shadows when the shadows themselves refuse to take shape? Every lead seemed to dissolve into a fog of bureaucratic normalcy. Every inquiry met with a wall of perfectly aligned paperwork and plausible explanations. The unsettling truth settled in. This was no ordinary theft. It was a meticulously orchestrated act designed not just to steal, but to erase the very trace of the crime itself. The usual markers, broken locks, eyewitnesses' suspicious activity, were deliberately stripped away. The operation was engineered to blend seamlessly into the background, to become indistinguishable from the ordinary ebb and flow of business. In doing so, it turned the investigation into a game of chasing paperwork instead of people, of following shadows instead of suspects. The authorities were left grappling with a crime that defied the fundamental principles of detection. The robbery was not meant to be caught. It was meant to never be found. This was a new kind of criminal act, one that eroded the boundaries between legality and illegality, visibility and invisibility. As the case unfolded, it became clear that the usual tools of law enforcement, surveillance, interrogations, forensic analysis, were ill-equipped to handle a theft so cleverly concealed within the fabric of everyday life. The investigators faced a chilling reality. Sometimes, the most dangerous crimes are those that never look like crimes at all. To follow the thread of these elusive offenses, it is essential to remain attentive to the subtle patterns that underlie seemingly ordinary events. This channel presents a collection of such cases, detailing the shadows where Yakuza operations intertwine with false identities and meticulously planned robberies engineered to vanish without a trace. Subscribing here ensures a steady passage through these labyrinthine stories, where each episode uncovers new facets of clandestine networks and methods designed to evade detection. The investigation continues beyond what is visible, delving into the careful construction of deception and the intricate codes that govern underground dealings. Understanding these elements requires not only patience, but also a sustained engagement with the complexities of organized crime in its most sophisticated forms. By following this ongoing analysis, viewers gain insight into how criminal enterprises adapt and conceal themselves within the very structures meant to expose them. In the case at hand, the theft's concealment within everyday life challenges traditional investigative approaches, demanding a nuanced perspective that this channel aims to provide. As we proceed, the focus will sharpen on the mechanisms that allow such crimes to remain hidden, whether through forged identities, shadowy alliances, or the use of seemingly innocuous transactions as cover. Each layer peeled back reveals a deeper level of orchestration and intent. Continuing with this methodical examination, the narrative will explore how these shadowy figures operate in plain sight, manipulating systems and exploiting vulnerabilities that standard procedures overlook. Remaining connected here offers a sustained vantage point from which to observe and analyze the evolving tactics of those who operate in the margins between lawfulness and concealment. This ongoing inquiry is structured to illuminate the subtle interplay of trust, deception, and strategy that defines these cases, providing a framework for understanding crimes designed to disappear before they can be fully grasped. The Yakuza's operational environment is characterized by a complex web of structures designed to blur the lines between illicit and legitimate activities. At its core, this environment thrives on layering multiple businesses and intermediaries, creating a labyrinth that conceals criminal actions beneath the surface of everyday commerce. Rather than relying on overt violence or direct confrontation, these organizations embed themselves in legal enterprises, construction firms, real estate, finance, and entertainment, using these as fronts or conduits through which unlawful gains are funneled and laundered. This layering process is not haphazard. It's a deliberate strategy that multiplies the obstacles facing investigators, rendering direct connections between crime and consequence nearly invisible. The use of intermediaries is pivotal. Rather than members handling transactions or operations directly, trusted agents and front companies serve as buffers, insulating leadership from exposure. These intermediaries handle everything from money transfers to contract negotiations, effectively compartmentalizing the flow of information and responsibility. By segmenting roles and limiting knowledge of the broader scheme, the organization ensures that no single individual has a complete picture. This compartmentalization, a hallmark of their operational security, means that even those involved in the network may be unaware of the full scope or nature of the crimes they facilitate. Such fragmentation hinders law enforcement's ability to piece together a coherent narrative or establish definitive timelines. Silence, both cultural and enforced, further fortifies this environment. Within these circles, a code of discretion and loyalty suppresses disclosure, whether voluntary or coerced. This silence extends beyond verbal communication to the very absence of clear evidence. No witnesses who can testify, no physical crime scenes marked by violence or disorder. The crimes committed often leave no immediate or identifiable victims. The damage is diffuse, financial, or reputational, affecting institutions or individuals in ways that are difficult to pinpoint or prove. This lack of a tangible crime scene or victim complicates traditional investigative approaches, which rely on concrete evidence and testimony to build cases. The subtlety of these operations explains why certain thefts or financial manipulations can remain concealed indefinitely. In the case under scrutiny, the robbery did not manifest as a dramatic break-in or an overt seizure of assets, but was embedded within layers of transactions and business dealings that appeared routine. The absence of a discrete moment or location where the crime occurred means that the act is effectively camouflaged within the normal ebb and flow of business activity. This blending into legitimate systems ensures that the illicit actions are masked by the noise of legal economic behavior, making detection akin to finding a needle in a haystack. Moreover, the organizational design itself discourages whistleblowing or leaks. The threat of retaliation, combined with a culture that prizes invisibility, ensures that internal breaches are rare. In addition, the overlapping presence of legal and illegal operations creates plausible deniability. When questioned, those involved can point to legitimate contracts, invoices, or meetings, muddying the waters further and complicating judicial scrutiny. Understanding this environment is critical to grasping why certain crimes remain hidden. The Yakuza's approach is less about dramatic heists and more about sustained invisibility, an ongoing shadow crime that thrives on the interplay between legality and crime, trust and deception, clarity and obfuscation. The robbery in question exemplifies this modus operandi, where the absence of clear victims, scenes, or timelines is not an oversight, but a deliberate feature, designed to keep the crime out of sight and out of reach. The target of the operation was chosen with a precision that mirrored the subtlety of the Yakuza's broader strategy. Nothing flashy, nothing immediate, nothing that would set off alarms or demand urgent attention. It wasn't a vault stuffed with cash or a shipment of high-value goods, nor a glaring breach in a well-guarded system. Instead, the focus was on a complex network of routine transactions nestled within a trusted framework, an ecosystem built on assumptions of integrity and reliability. This network, a seemingly mundane flow of resources, payments, and data exchanges, was so deeply embedded in everyday operations that any disruption would be invisible at first glance. The brilliance lay in targeting a system designed precisely to operate without scrutiny. The target structure was a carefully maintained choreography, transactions that happened daily, from small to large, each one seemingly legitimate, each one crossing the right channels and passing through layers of automated verification without hesitation. It was like siphoning water from a vast reservoir through countless tiny, almost imperceptible leaks instead of draining it all at once. This ensured that nothing appeared out of place. No alarms sounded, no red flags were raised, because the transactions followed expected patterns, amounts, and sequences. They were routine in every sense, their predictability a perfect cover. By design, the system relied heavily on trust. Trust between partners, trust in automated processes, trust that checks and balances were operating as intended. This trust was the real vulnerability. The target was a well-oiled machine, but one that assumed good faith as its foundation. It wasn't programmed to suspect internal discrepancies or subtle manipulations, especially not when those manipulations mimicked legitimate behavior. This implicit confidence meant that the smallest deviations were swallowed by the noise of normalcy, hidden within the volume of legitimate activity. No immediate signs of theft or tampering appeared. Reports generated by the system reflected expected balances. Audits conducted at regular intervals showed no discrepancies significant enough to warrant concern. The employees and users involved in the flow of transactions saw nothing unusual. No missing funds, no failed processes, no errors. To them, everything was operating as usual. This absence of anomaly was crucial because it erased the possibility of rapid response or investigation. The theft was a ghost, moving through the labyrinth of data and transactions without leaving a trace visible to those who mattered. The real impact of the crime was delayed. Instead of an immediate loss, what unfolded was a slow, creeping erosion that would only become apparent far down the line. Over time, the cumulative effect of these minute subtractions would strain the system, eventually manifesting as shortfalls or failures, but only after a considerable delay, long enough for the perpetrators to remain well beyond suspicion. This slow burn was the essence of the strategy, avoiding detection not by hiding in the shadows of a single moment, but by embedding the crime within the fabric of ongoing operations, ensuring that the system's very design worked against uncovering it. In this way, the target wasn't just a point of theft, it was a reflection of the Yakuza's approach to crime itself, where the absence of immediate evidence was the greatest evidence of all. The choice to strike a system that appeared flawless, reliable, and self-sustaining was intentional, a calculated move to exploit the blind spots created by trust and routine. Nothing looked wrong initially, and that was exactly the point. Throughout the operation, the use of false and borrowed identities was a crucial element that enabled the Shadow Crimes team to navigate complex networks and evade detection. These identities were not crafted to withstand deep investigation or long-term association. Rather, they were tools designed for immediate, short-lived tasks, mere masks to be discarded once their purpose was fulfilled. The deliberate impermanence of these aliases reflected a strategic philosophy. No single identity held intrinsic value beyond its brief utility. In practice, this meant that each member of the operation adopted multiple names, each tailored to specific interactions or transactions. Whether it was opening a temporary bank account, renting an inconspicuous apartment, or arranging discreet meetings, these borrowed identities functioned as intermediaries between the operatives and the outside world. The team never relied on a single alias for multiple stages of the plan, understanding that any prolonged use increased exposure and risk. Instead, identities were swapped and cycled rapidly, like chess pieces moved across the board only to be sacrificed for a larger strategy. This approach also extended to the creation of supporting characters, fabricated personas backed by minimal but convincing documentation. These were the phantoms who would take calls, receive shipments, or sign papers, all without leaving a traceable trail back to the operatives themselves. The use of disposable names in this way allowed the team to compartmentalize their actions, ensuring that if one identity was compromised, it would not unravel the entire operation. Each alias was a single thread, and cutting it would leave no damage to the broader fabric. The ephemeral nature of these false identities was purposeful. None were built to last beyond their immediate function, nor were they designed to establish continuity. The team avoided creating elaborate backstories or digital footprints that could be pieced together by forensic analysts. Instead, they relied on minimal personal details, often lifted from public records or fabricated documents that blended seamlessly into the background noise of everyday life. The simplicity and disposability of these identities were their greatest strengths. They were unremarkable by design, unlikely to arouse suspicion precisely because they were so easily overlooked. Moreover, the operatives understood that the success of their mission depended on the ability to vanish without a trace once an alias had served its role. After brief periods of use, these identities were abandoned entirely, their associated data scrubbed or left to dissolve naturally in digital limbo. No attempts were made to maintain contact or appearances beyond necessity, reinforcing the idea that these names were never meant to survive scrutiny. They were shadows, passing figures who left no footprints, no records, no memories. This calculated use of false identities echoed the core principle that underpinned the entire operation: invisibility through transience. Just as the team targeted a system whose flawless exterior masked hidden vulnerabilities, their own presence was masked by a continuous cycle of assumed names, each one designed to disappear swiftly and without consequence. In this way, the operation maintained a fluid anonymity, a moving target that defied capture not through strength but through the artful use of absence. The resulting effect was a labyrinth of identities that existed only momentarily, a network of faces without names and names without stories. In the end, the importance was never in who they pretended to be, but in the fact that they ceased to be at all. This fleeting existence was the linchpin of their strategy, ensuring that the shadow crimes operation remained invisible, untouchable, and ultimately successful. The robbery unfolded not as a sudden strike, but as an intricate dance stretched over days, weeks, even months. There was no distinct moment to pinpoint the act, no singular flash that could be captured or traced. Instead, it was a slow, deliberate unraveling orchestrated through a series of subtle moves, each seemingly insignificant on its own, but together weaving an impenetrable veil of confusion. Every transaction was a whisper in the noise, a fragment of a larger mosaic that revealed nothing until the whole was long past. Funds slipped through countless accounts, each layer masking the last, while identities faded in and out like shadows in twilight. No single thread held the entire weight of the scheme. Instead, responsibility and risk were meticulously dispersed across a sprawling web of actors, each one touching the operation only briefly before dissolving into another role, another name, another illusion. Patience was their greatest weapon. There was no rush, no frantic urgency to seize the prize in one breathless moment. The plan was conceived with the understanding that time itself could be an ally, slow enough to avoid detection, fragmented enough to resist reconstruction. Every step was measured, each move designed to delay consequences far beyond immediate sight, making it impossible to link cause and effect with certainty. By the time the results surfaced, the initial acts had long since slipped beneath layers of obfuscation, leaving only echoes and dead ends. The strategy was not about speed, but about scattering pieces so thinly that even those who sought to assemble them would find only dust. It was an exercise in controlled chaos, where confusion was cultivated deliberately, a fog thick enough to blind even the sharpest observers. The absence of a clear timestamp was no accident, but the product of countless small decisions. Transfers delayed, communications staggered, identities rotated with surgical precision. Each element was a brushstroke in a painting meant to blur, not to define. This method eliminated the risk of a single point of failure. No one moment could unravel the entire enterprise because there was no singular moment to begin with. Instead, the crime existed as a distributed phenomenon, a phantom that could not be grasped whole. The participants understood that exposure came not from a glaring mistake, but from the slow accumulation of patterns, and so they ensured those patterns never crystallized. They moved like ghosts through a labyrinth of their own making, leaving behind nothing that could be held, nothing that could be pinned to a moment or a person. In doing so, they transformed the very nature of the robbery. It was less an event and more a process, a living organism spreading through time and space without a fixed shape. The true mastery lay in making the theft invisible not by hiding the act itself, but by dissolving its contours, erasing its edges until it became nothing more than a rumor, a suspicion too vague to pursue. This was a crime designed to resist time, to evade memory, to linger only as a shadow without form, precisely as intended. The robbery did not announce itself with the loud clatter of forced entry or the hurried footsteps of a fleeing culprit. Instead, it unfolded with such quiet precision that, in the moment, it escaped notice entirely. There was no shattered glass, no upturned furniture, and no immediate indication that anything had been disturbed. The usual markers of crime, the kind that draw attention and demand investigation, were absent. What transpired was something far more subtle, a gradual siphoning carried out not through brute force, but through deliberate, almost imperceptible means. No confrontation occurred. No witnesses heard raised voices or footsteps where none should have been. The individuals involved operated within the bounds of routine access, blending into the usual flow of everyday life. Access was neither stolen nor forced. It was granted indirectly, through layers of trust and complacency that had been carefully cultivated over time. This allowed the perpetrators to move through the space like ghosts, their presence recorded only as faint anomalies in logs and records, too slight to provoke alarm. The stolen assets themselves did not vanish suddenly, but were quietly redirected. Transactions were masked behind legitimate exchanges, and ownership shifted through a series of seemingly ordinary transfers that, in isolation, raised no suspicion. The robbery was not a single act, but a sequence of small, calculated adjustments, each one innocuous on its own, but collectively significant. It resembled the slow leak of water from a tank, unnoticed until the level had dropped well below what anyone expected. The absence of a physical crime scene complicated any effort to pinpoint the moment or manner of the theft. Unlike traditional burglaries, where the aftermath is a tangible tableau of disorder, this crime left behind no visual clues. There were no fingerprints, no discarded tools, no signs of forced entry or hurried escape. Instead, the evidence lay buried within layers of documentation, digital footprints, and subtle discrepancies that only revealed themselves under careful scrutiny. The crime was discovered only when patterns emerged, when routine audits and reconciliations failed to align, and the cumulative effect of small irregularities could no longer be ignored. In hindsight, what had appeared to be normal operations took on a different hue. The very normality of the activities was part of the deception, a cloak that obscured the theft's true nature. The perpetrators understood this well, exploiting the trust inherent in everyday procedures to mask their actions. The robbery's invisibility was not accidental, but a deliberate strategy to ensure it would remain hidden until it was too late to recover what had been lost. This form of crime defied conventional expectations. It was neither a violent incursion nor a chaotic intrusion, but a meticulously orchestrated process that unfolded quietly, indirectly, and with calculated patience. Only after the fact did the full extent of the loss become apparent, revealing a crime that had no clear scene, no dramatic moment of discovery, but instead lingered as a shadow cast backward over what had been taken. It wasn't until weeks after the initial suspicion that the absence became undeniable. At first, the missing elements were small discrepancies, an unaccounted ledger entry here, a discrepancy in inventory counts there, glimmers too faint to raise immediate alarm. In an environment accustomed to minor fluctuations and human error, these irregularities blended into the background noise of daily operations. But as the numbers consistently failed to align, a growing unease settled in. The loss was no longer a vague possibility, but a confirmed reality, though pinpointing when it had occurred proved elusive. Unlike a typical robbery marked by a clear breach or a sudden, violent episode, this crime left no immediate trace. There was no shattered glass, no forced entry, no hurried footsteps or alarms blaring through the night. Instead, the absence crept in quietly, insidiously, as if the stolen goods had never been there at all. This delayed realization complicated the investigation, forcing those involved to question their assumptions about the timeline. Was the theft recent, or had it been unfolding over months? Had it been a single calculated strike, or a slow siphoning over time? The meticulous nature of the loss suggested a perpetrator with intimate knowledge of the operation's inner workings. Yet, without a clear timestamp, the investigators found themselves chasing shadows, searching for moments that might never have existed in the way they expected. The crime seemed to occupy a liminal space between events, a void where the normal markers of time and place dissolved. This ambiguity frustrated attempts to reconstruct the crime scene or identify suspects based on opportunity alone. As the investigation deepened, it became apparent that the missing assets had been extracted with a precision that defied conventional logic. The absence was not just physical, but procedural. A gap in the records, a silence in the logs, a pattern of omission cleverly concealed within layers of routine. The perpetrators had exploited this to their advantage, turning the very predictability of the system into a shield against detection. Each missing piece was masked by the flow of normalcy, each absence swallowed by the routine pulse of the operation. This growing realization that the robbery had no definitive moment of occurrence challenged the framework through which such crimes are typically understood. It blurred the boundaries between victim and perpetrator, between past and present. The investigators began to see the crime less as a single event and more as a process, a slow erosion rather than a sudden rupture. This nuanced understanding opened new avenues for inquiry, but also underscored the complexity of uncovering crimes designed to disappear. The delayed discovery of a loss and the uncertainty surrounding its timing highlighted a new dimension of criminal ingenuity. It was a reminder that some crimes do not announce themselves with drama or confrontation, but instead unfold quietly beneath the surface, revealed only through patience, persistence, and a willingness to look beyond the obvious. In the world of shadow crimes, where identities shift and thefts vanish into the ether, understanding the invisible becomes as crucial as uncovering the visible. If you find this unraveling of hidden losses compelling, and you want to explore more stories where deception is woven into every detail, from Yakuza intrigues to elaborate false identities and robberies that leave no trace, subscribe and follow along. Together, we'll navigate the shadows where these crimes dwell, piecing together the puzzles that others overlook. The attempt to piece together the sequence of events that led to the crime revealed itself as a labyrinth of fragmented records and elusive details. Investigators found themselves sifting through a maze of paperwork, each document offering fragments that only deepened the confusion rather than clarified the timeline. Official records, transaction logs, and correspondence often conflicted, presenting dates and statements that failed to align with one another. This lack of consistency made it impossible to identify a definitive starting point from which the investigation could gain momentum. One of the most significant obstacles arose from the scattered and incomplete nature of the timelines. Witness accounts, when they existed, were sporadic and frequently contradicted one another, while many potential leads dissolved into dead ends. Without a coherent chronology, the team struggled to establish who had been where and when, a crucial factor in reconstructing the chain of events. The overlapping and sometimes contradictory entries in databases suggested overlapping identities or aliases, complicating the effort to track individuals involved. These discrepancies did not stem from negligence, but from the inherent complexity of the case, where deliberate obfuscation and indirect interactions left little for investigators to grasp firmly. The identities linked to the case were themselves a puzzle, marked by a series of names that appeared and disappeared without clear context. Some names corresponded to real individuals, yet their involvement remained ambiguous due to inconsistent information across various channels. Others seemed to be placeholders or fabricated identities, contributing to the overall uncertainty. Attempts to verify these identities through official channels often stalled, as records either lacked sufficient detail or were protected behind layers of privacy protocols. This created a situation where chasing a name often led nowhere, further fracturing the investigation's progress. The investigators' efforts to cross-reference documents with physical evidence and testimonies yielded little in terms of concrete connections. The files they examined detailed transactions, communications, and movements, but rarely converged into a coherent narrative. Instead, these records often contradicted each other, suggesting the possibility of intentional misinformation or simply the chaotic aftermath of complex criminal activity. The absence of a clear starting point meant that each lead required exhaustive validation, consuming time and resources without producing definitive breakthroughs. Rather than focusing on the individuals or institutions responsible for the gaps and contradictions, the investigation framed these challenges as inherent difficulties in navigating a case deliberately designed to evade straightforward detection. The absence of reliable, chronological data and the prevalence of ambiguous or incomplete records underscored the degree to which the crime was entangled within a web of shadows. This intricate network of half-truths and obscured identities effectively stalled the investigation, as there was no clear thread to follow from the outset. As the inquiry continued, the team recognized that progress hinged not on chasing elusive people or forcing a timeline where none existed, but on uncovering new types of evidence that could provide unambiguous anchors for the reconstruction. Until such evidence emerged, the case remained suspended in a state of unresolved complexity, a testament to how some crimes are not only acts of deception, but also exercises in controlling the very records that might expose them. The investigators' pursuit highlighted the limitations of traditional methods when faced with a puzzle that resisted being pieced together from the fragments left behind. The evening had settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that fills the spaces between whispered conversations and hurried footsteps. Inside the small, dimly lit office where the investigators had been piecing together the scattered clues, a faint anomaly began to ripple beneath the surface of their carefully assembled narrative. It was a detail so slight, so easily dismissed, that it might have slipped away unnoticed if not for the sharp eye of one persistent analyst. As the team reviewed the logs once more, cross-referencing timestamps and transaction records, a subtle discrepancy emerged, a timestamp on a surveillance feed that didn't quite align with the others. The footage, meant to corroborate the timeline of the theft, showed a brief flicker of a figure in an area supposedly under lockdown at that precise moment. The catch: the timecode suggested the camera was operational slightly earlier than the official system logs claimed it had been activated. It was a negligible inconsistency, a fraction of a second, but enough to unsettle the fragile framework holding the case together. Curiously, the security manager had sworn the system had been offline for routine maintenance during that window, a detail that had been accepted without question. Yet the footage, grainy and almost imperceptible, hinted at life within those shadows. The figure was indistinct, a silhouette blurred by poor lighting, but its presence contradicted the official narrative. Had someone manipulated the system's clock? Or was this a deliberate oversight, a thin veil thrown over the true sequence of events? The investigators exchanged glances, their confidence wavering under the weight of this near exposure. The crime, so meticulously planned and dispersed among disconnected actors, now revealed a fragile thread that might unravel the entire operation. Every small inconsistency became a potential fracture point, threatening to expose the carefully guarded secret behind the shadows. Yet the detail remained unresolved. The footage's ambiguity refused to provide clear answers, and the security manager's explanation, though plausible, did little to settle the growing unease. The team found themselves caught between suspicion and uncertainty, unable to confirm whether this was a genuine breach or a mere technical glitch. This moment of doubt cast long shadows over the investigation. The complexity of the crime, its deliberate fragmentation, the layers of deception, meant that even the slightest crack could lead to collapse. But here, the crack neither widened nor closed. It lingered, a subtle but persistent reminder that the truth was not only elusive but dangerously close to slipping through their fingers. As the night deepened, the analysts returned to their work, haunted by the possibility that the near exposure was more than a fleeting anomaly. It was a whisper from the edge of revelation, a fragile echo of the hidden forces at play. The case remained suspended in that delicate balance, poised between exposure and concealment, a testament to how even the most dispersed shadow crimes could betray themselves in the smallest details. This robbery was never meant to be uncovered. Its design was a masterstroke of erasure, a calculated dissolution of the very elements that investigations rely on: time, place, and identity. Without a fixed location, the crime vanished into the fabric of countless ordinary moments. Without a timestamp, its occurrence blurred into an indistinguishable stretch of days and nights. Without an identifiable perpetrator, the act became a ghost, impossible to track or attribute. This was not a failure of detection. It was a deliberate strategy to render detection irrelevant. The success lay in its invisibility, not in its absence. This crime did not vanish or fade. It assimilated. It slipped into the system's cracks and crevices, where data points scatter like dust and patterns dissolve into noise. The stolen goods, the digital traces, even the whispers of suspicion all merged seamlessly into the endless churn of transactions, files, and faces. The offense was not a singular event marked by disruption, but a slow, silent infiltration camouflaged by the very machinery designed to prevent it. The investigators found themselves chasing shadows in a labyrinth without walls, where every lead evaporated before solid form. The crime's architecture was built on the erasure of context, stripping away the anchors that would allow pursuit or prosecution. This was a theft that never announced itself. It was a crime that never existed outside its own carefully constructed void. In this absence, however, lies a chilling truth. The system itself can be weaponized, its layers of bureaucracy and anonymity manipulated to create perfect alibis and impenetrable facades. The robbery was not an act of desperation, but a calculated exploitation of the modern world's blind spots. It is a stark reminder that some crimes do not scream for justice. They whisper secrets only the most vigilant can begin to hear. If you think this case challenges your understanding of crime and concealment, prepare to delve deeper. The next Shadow Crimes episode will unravel how some criminals erase themselves entirely, turning identity, paperwork, and the endless gears of bureaucracy into tools of vanishing. Watch closely because in those stories, disappearance is not an accident. It is an art form.